Coming at you from Bellingham, Washington. This is Two Nuts in the Sack. I'm Julie.
And I'm Gavin. It's been a while since our last episode. The irony is that as we were preparing for the coronavirus episode, we wanted to make sure that what we brought to you was factually accurate. So we spent extra time. But we also got really sick. But that gave us time to take a deep dive on today's subject. Also, I want to send out condolences for a flat earther who literally gave his life for the cause. Again, we are, as the flat earthers refer to us, globetards. But it makes this story no less sad. In our Flat Earth Theory episode, we told the story about Mike Hughes, a limo driver from Apple Valley, California. To recap, this was the fella who built his own rocket to prove for himself that the Earth was flat. In 2018, he blasted off and soared 1,900 feet into the air. After a less than graceful landing, he made it clear that this was more of a test, a proof of concept, so to speak, before the actual launch that would prove once and for all the flatness or roundness of the Earth for him. On February 22nd, Mad Mike Hughes met his maker. Outside of Barstow, California, the self-taught astronaut attempted once again to soar into the stratosphere. It is clear from the video that the parachute designed to bring him back safely to the Earth deployed early and was ripped from the rocket. The pod which held Hughes crashed back into this round Earth. R.I.P. Mad Mike Hughes. Gone but not forgotten. This is a sad segue, but I'll plow through it anyway, because Mike's tenacity and ingenuity, despite the fatal consequences, is inspiring in a way. Today we're going to talk about another inspiring individual whom also took risks, and his ingenuity helped to change the world. His tenacious spirit and undying love of the ocean world that continues to keep us interested in the oceans as the largest part of the global ecosystem. We've heard his voice over his numerous TV shows, and his personality has been parodied on TV and movies, most notably Wes Anderson's The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. Today, we'll take a deep dive, pun thoroughly intended, into the life of one of our heroes, the man with the mission to save the sea, Jaques Yves Cousteau.
All right. I'd like to start off by saying please forgive me for my French pronunciations. They are not easy.
French is a language that still baffles me. I've studied some Romance languages, but French is the hardest. So, bear with us, folks.
Jaques Yves Cousteau was a French naval officer, explorer, conservationist, filmmaker, innovator, scientist, photographer, author, and researcher who studied the sea and all forms of life in the water.
A literal jack of all trades of the ocean.
Basically. He co-developed the Aqualung, pioneered marine conservation, and was a member of the Académie franchise.
Académie Française.
That's how you say it. Cousteau described his underwater world research in a series of books. Cousteau also directed films, most notably the documentary adaptation of the book The Silent World. In his early years, he was born on the 11th of June, 1910, in Saint-André de Cubsac-Grande. Am I saying this right, Gavin? Bear with me here.
André de Cubsac-Grande.
Bravo. Okay, France, to Daniel and Elizabeth Cousteau. He had one brother, Pierre-Antoine. In 1930, he entered the École Normale and graduated as...
École Naval.
Thank you. And graduated as a gunnery officer. However, an automobile accident which broke both his arms cut short his career in naval aviation, so he then indulged his passion for the ocean.
And God help us, that was probably for the best.
Yes, absolutely. Cousteau also belonged to the information service of the French Navy and was sent on missions to Shanghai and Japan, 1935 to 1938, and in the USSR, 1939.
He was a spy.
Yes. Yes, definitely. On the 12th of July, 1937, he married Simone Melchior. Am I saying that right? Melchior. Melchior. I was close. With whom he had two sons, Jean-Michel, born 1938, and Philippe, 1940. His sons took part in the adventures of his Calypso. In 1991, after his wife Simone's death from cancer, he married Francine Triplet. They already had a daughter, Diane Cousteau, born 1980, and a son, Jaques Cousteau, born in 1982.
You gotta kind of forgive him because he's French.
Yeah, born during marriage to his first wife.
Yeah. Well, but he's French.
That's no excuse. That's just terrible. World War II, after the ceasefire of 1940, the family of Simone and Jaques Yves Cousteau took refuge in Megève, where he became a friend of Jacques' family and who also lived there.
I'm sorry to keep correcting.
Yeah, I actually, in the beginning, before we started, remember when I told you not to do that unless I asked?
I know.
Do you remember that?
Your French is horrible. So I'll try and keep up, but my French ain't that great either.
Okay, to reveal to the general public unknown and inaccessible places for Cousteau, the underwater world, and for Jacques, the high mountains. The two neighbors took the first... Oh my gosh, please pronounce this for me.
Equal prize
Of the Congress of Documentary Film. 18 meters deep, made without a breathing apparatus the previous year in the... Pronounce?
Ambiers
Islands, with Philippe Thalys and Frederic Dumas.
Glad you didn't call them dumbasses.
I really keep wanting to say that. It's spelled D-U-M-A-S, and you just want to say dumbass.
Call me Andy Dufresne.
You just really want to say it. In 1943, they made the film Shipwrecks, in which they used two of the very first aqualung prototypes. These prototypes are made in Boulogne-Billancourt. Is that correct?
Boulogne-Billancourt.
By the Air Liquide Company.
Air Liquide. Okay,
whatever, Gavin. Jaques Yves Cousteau was not satisfied with the length of time he could spend underwater with the Lipriere apparatus. So he improved it to extend underwater duration by adding a demand regulator invented in 1942 by Emile Gagnon. Okay.
All right, let me take this one. Okay.
Sounds good.
The aqualung was one of many contributions from the brilliant mind of Jaques Cousteau. Collaborating with the engineer Emile Gagnon in the winter of 1942 to 1943. The two improved upon the design Cousteau had used previously in his military career. The idea of a man carrying an autonomous canister of air on his back goes back to the late 1800s. Designed originally as an emergency air supply for miners trapped in flooded mines, the system was fairly primitive. The air was free-flowing, as in you turned on the gas and it just kept going, but you could put your mouth to it and get a nice lungful of air. But the air tank itself was not that long lasting. Emile Gagnon was employed by the company Air Liquide. He developed a demand regulator which was designed to regulate gas generators. Gagnon's boss was one Henri Melchior, who was the father-in-law of Jaques Cousteau, who was looking for the automatic demand regulator to increase his time in the undersea world. The two conspired to develop the aqualung, a fully functional, self-contained underwater breathing apparatus, or scuba system. This essentially cut the cord to the surface and allowed a person to enter the ocean world as if they were a fish. Fishmen, as Cousteau would later say it. This allowed the intrepid ocean explorer to take a new look at life below the surface in a full three-dimensional view. This was always my favorite part of scuba diving. I'm a certified scuba diver.
Yes, I know this.
Yes. But this was always my favorite part. So for give or take an hour, directionality and was inconsequential. You can move in any direction and all directions at the flip of a fin. Floating around in the water is as close as you can get to floating around in space.
In 1946, Cousteau and Talliez showed the film Shipwrecks to, what does this say? Say this for me.
Admiral.
Does that say Admiral? Oh my gosh, I can't read my own writing. Admiral Lemonnier, who gave them the responsibility of setting up the Underwater Research Group, or the French Navy in Toulon. In 1947, Chief Petty Officer Maurice Fargus became the first diver to die using an aqualung while attempting to new depth record with the GRS near Toulon. In 1948, Cousteau and Marcel Icoc, I'm saying that name all wrong. Icoc brought back from the Carnets. Am I saying that right? Carnets. Oh my god, I'm doing terrible, Gavin.
It's okay, baby. It's a lot of French, and honestly, like I can barely speak Italian, and I almost have a grasp on Spanish, but French has always been totally lost to me. There's too many letters and syllables and consonants that I just don't understand when they're pushed together.
Right. Carnet's diving film presented and proceeded with the Cannes Film Festival 1951. Cousteau and Elie Monnier then took part in the rescue of Professor Jacques Picard's bathysphere, the FVRS-2, during the 1949 expedition to Dakar. Thanks to this rescue, the French Navy was able to rescue the sphere of the bathysphere, that's a really tough word, to construct the FNRS-3.
So basically, like a bathysphere is, think of it as like a bobber that goes underwater and is able to observe the world. It's like a submarine, only it's attached to the surface. So that's what a bathysphere is. So basically what the French Navy did was they were able to pick up the sphere from the bottom of the ocean where it had fallen and pull it back up to the surface. So it's basically a diving bell, which is another primitive form of ocean exploration, wherein they just kept pressurized air inside of a cup. But this was a sphere, and they would lower it into the ocean, and that was a way that you could look around the ocean before anything cooler was produced.
The adventures of this period are told in the two books, The Silent World, 1953. Also in 1949, Cousteau left the French Navy. In 1950, he founded...
Technically, he didn't leave the French Navy. What he did was persuade the French Navy to allow him to create his own branch of the Navy. So basically what he wanted to do was research the underwater world. And so he petitioned to the Navy to be able to do that. So that's kind of cool.
In 1950, he founded the French Oceanographic Campaign and leased a ship called Calypso.
Now, the Calypso was really cool. The Calypso was Cousteau's base of operations and has a history almost as rich as Cousteau himself. Originally commissioned by the British government as a minesweeper, it was built right here in Washington State by the Ballard Marine Railway Company out of Seattle, Washington. It was loaned to the British Navy and was classified as the BYMS 2026 in 1944. Her job was to sweep the Mediterranean for Nazi mines. By 1946, her mission was complete, and the BYMS 2026 was decommissioned in July of that year. In 1947, 2026 was officially returned to the U.S. Navy and destined to live in a naval scrapyard. But in May of 1949, the ship was purchased by one Jaques Cousteau of Malta for the purpose of ferrying mail and people between Marfa, Malta, and Gozo, an island near Malta. It was renamed the Calypso G, and after only 4 months of active service, Cousteau received an attractive offer, of which he took hold of, and the offer came from one Thomas Lowell Guinness, a former MP in Britain and billionaire, though the money was from his mother's side. His paternal uncle was Arthur Guinness. As it is St. Paddy's Day, I just thought it was interesting to comment on. And in the spirit of that, I'm going to pop a Guinness.
Yeah! That's awesome.
For us.
Thank
Have
you.
Keep your throat wet. I'll pop one for myself. Cheers, baby.
Cheers. Delicious.
Isn't it, though? Back to Cousteau. Guinness purchased the Calypso on July of 1950. He leased the ship to Jaques for a symbolic 1 franc a year under 2 conditions. Cousteau was never to ask him for money and never reveal his identity as the true owner of the Calypso. Cousteau kept his word, telling all that asked that he had bought the boat with money from his family. The information about the Calypso's true owner only came out after Cousteau's death. Now at the helm of the Calypso, Cousteau turned her into a full-fledged research vessel, a base for diving expeditions, a studio for filming his numerous documentaries, the heart of his oceanographic research. Cousteau outfitted the Calypso with advanced equipment, almost all of which he had a hand in developing. 2 mini-submarines, a single and a 2-man submarine, which the crew referred to as the Flying Saucer because of its round, squat shape. There was also a small squadron of underwater scooters he used to help his divers move through the water without exhausting their air supply. There was also a helicopter pad to make it easier for Cousteau to have crew and supplies flown to and from shore without having to return to port. But my favorite modification was an observation pod fitted to the front of the ship, almost 10 feet below the waterline. A front row seat to the world of the deep that Cousteau wanted to study and explore with the unbridled glee of a child seeing something wonderful for the first time. And that's how he felt when he was sitting in that pod. But Cousteau probably would have considered his favorite piece of equipment to be the Calypso underwater camera. A 35mm camera Cousteau developed with the help of Jean de Wautreuse. The camera was designed to operate up to 200 feet below the ocean surface and was responsible for the visual introduction to Cousteau's silent world. The Calypso met her end in an unfortunate collision with a barge in the Bay of Singapore. She sank on January 8th, 1996. With the aid of a crane, she was raised on January 16th, 1996, and dried out and towed to a shipyard to live out the same fate slated for her almost 50 years prior. Restoration was attempted many times, but as with many artifacts, ownership was called into question. Lowell Guinness, grandson of Thomas Lowell Guinness, waged legal battle with Francine Cousteau, the de facto head of the Cousteau Society. After many years of legal dispute and a few attempts at full restoration, Lowell Guinness sold the Calypso to the Cousteau Society for the same ceremonial one from in 2006. Many more efforts have been made to restore the Calypso to its former glory, but as of last year, she's been stripped down to a bare hull. On the bright side, many of the artifacts salvaged from the Calypso will be displayed at the Malta Maritime Museum in 2021.
In 1957, Cousteau took over as leader on the Oceanographic Museum of Morocco. Is that Morocco?
Yes.
Afterward, with the assistance of Jean Mollard, he made a driving saucer SP-350, an experimental underwater vehicle which could reach a depth of 350 meters. The successful experiment was quickly repeated in 1965 with two vehicles which reached 500 meters. He was involved in the creation of the Confederation Mondiale des Activités Subquatiques. Take over this spelling, please, Gavin.
Mondiale des Activités Subaquatiques.
And served as its inaugural president from 1959 to 1973. In the 1960s, Cousteau was involved with a set of 3 projects to build underwater villages. The projects were named Precontinent 1, Precontinent 2, and Precontinent 3. Each unsung project was aimed at increasing the depth at which people continuously lived underwater and were an attempt at creating an environment in which men could live and work on the seafloor.
So this is Operation Conshelf, or Precontinent. Cousteau tended to use these interchangeably. Cousteau led a team of divers in the 60s in an experiment to test the limits of man's journey into the beautiful briny sea. The first experiment saw 2 divers living in a cramped submersible habitat for 1 week at just 10 meters under the surface of the waters near Marseille. For 7 days in 1962, 2 divers, Alberto Falco and Claude Wesley, lived in Conshelf 1 habitat. 5 hours a day, they would leave the habitat to explore the world around them. They underwent scientific testing, looking at vital signs and blood gas volumes to test the effects of living at depth on the human body. Conshelf 2 was launched the following year in 1963. Far more involved and way more ambitious, this time 3 structures would be lowered into the Red Sea off the Sudanese coast. 6 oceanauts, as they were now called, would live at 10 meters for 30 days. The main living habitat was a starfish-shaped capsule. A much larger habitat, the divers had more room to move around. The 4 arms of the starfish had a laboratory, crew quarters, an eating area, and an airlock for divers to enter and exit the habitat, all centering around the central living area where the crew would meet and discuss the day's activities and where they would decompress, so to speak, after their daily missions. Basically, a small apartment designed as a base of operations for undersea experiments. The second structure was an underwater garage that would house the submersible crafts necessary to conduct their experiments. Cousteau often employed the same undersea scooters I talked about earlier. Basically, electric-powered engines that would propel the diver faster than the diver could swim, And without the physical exertion, the divers could conserve their air and extend their sojourn into the deep. It also housed the diving saucer, the two-man submarine equipped with high-powered lights, a mechanical crane arm for collecting specimens for study, and water jet nozzles to maneuver the submersibles straight out of science fiction. The saucer was capable of reaching depths of nearly 1,000 feet, an extraordinary craft that made leaps and bounds to exploring. The third capsule was dubbed the Deep Cabin, while the Starfish and submarine hangar stayed at 33 feet. Deep Cabin was set at 90 feet below the surface. The cabin was built for two. It was a three-story structure with a main living compartment at the top, a small lab below that, and a third layer that housed wetsuits and air tanks, and an airlock of sorts that allowed aquanauts in and out of the cabin. Though the technologies were cutting edge, they did not come without its unique set of problems. After Conshelf 1, Cousteau and crew set out to solve the problem of decompression sickness.
What's that?
So, when a diver is at depth for an appreciable amount of time, the ambient pressure of the water compresses gases, mainly nitrogen and oxygen, within the bloodstream. So you have these tiny little bubbles of these gases floating through your bloodstream. As the diver ascends to the surface, the pressure alleviates, and these tiny bubbles expand and then wreak havoc on the diver's circulatory system, a sometimes deadly consequence of deep dives. To combat this problem, Conshelf 2 was equipped with tanks of heliox, a combination of helium and oxygen. The gas has a lesser density than the air we breathe on the surface, the result of which is a lessening of the effects of decompression sickness, and also has the comedic effect of making all involved sound like they're members of the Lollipop Guild.
We represent the Lollipop Guild, the Lollipop Guild, the Lollipop Guild.
That's a wonderful sampling.
Ain't it though?
It may have sounded.
I tried so hard. It's not the best. The kids like it though.
So I'm sure that the first dive briefing was just a spectacle while they were all trying to adjust to this new gas that they were breathing. But it was a safety measure put in place so that they could extend their mission from 7 days to 30 days. But they could not foresee the damage the mix would have on their equipment. The hoses that they were using were not equipped to deal with heliox, as opposed to the compressed air they were rated for. The mixture caused hairline cracks in the hoses dangling from the surface, a minor inconvenience to the Starfish, but caused myriad problems for the Deep Cabin. At the end of the experiment, Deep Cabin was taking on water at an alarming rate. At the end of the 30-day voyage under the sea, Cousteau produced a feature-length documentary called A World Without Sun. It won an Academy Award that year for Best Documentary, but Cousteau was not ready to let go of his idea. Plus, with an Academy Award, he got a lot more funding. This brings us to Cousteau's final endeavor into undersea habitation, Conshelf 3. In 1965, Cousteau and 5 divers settled into their new undersea home, 336 feet below the surface of the Mediterranean Sea, near Cap Ferrat, the lighthouse between Nice and Monaco. Cousteau's aim was to sever ties to the surface, make the station more self-sufficient. The mission was set for another 30 days, but Cousteau himself cut the mission short. He'd gotten much of the funding for Conshelf from petrochemical companies. This was not more apparent to Cousteau than when a mock oil rig was placed near the Starfish, and Cousteau's men were instructed to maintain and fix simulated problems on the rig. Cousteau pulled his team and his research pods from the site. He redoubled his efforts from exploration to conservation and later formed the Cousteau Society in 1975 to establish protected areas for endangered species, to advocate for the silent world which cannot advocate for itself, to educate children and adults so they can carry on protecting our water planet.
The Sur the undersea world of Jaques Cousteau, with the character of the commander in the red bonnet, inherited from standard diving dress, intended to dive the films of personalized adventure. This documentary television series ran for 10 years, from 1966 to 1976. A second documentary series, The Cousteau Odyssey, ran from 1977 to 1982 on public television stations.
This is where we hear all those, all that French accent on top of undersea documentary.
In 1975, John Denver released the tribute song Calypso on his album Windsong, and on the B-side of his hit song, I'm Sorry, Calypso became a hit on its own and was later considered the new A-side, reaching number 2 on the charts.
We've listened to both these songs, and Calypso, while it doesn't really hold up, it definitely was the better song of the two.
Definitely. On the 28th of June, 1979, while Calypso was on an expedition to Portugal, his second son, Philippe, his preferred and designated successor, and with whom he had co-produced all his films since 1969, died in a Catalina seaplane crash in the Tagus River. Tagus, near Lisbon. Cousteau was deeply affected. He called his then eldest son, the architect Jean-Michel, to his side. This collaboration lasted 14 years. That's really sad.
That is really sad. I mean, seriously, no parent should have to see the death of a child.
No way. In 1985, he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Ronald Reagan. On the 24th of November, 1988, he was elected to the Academy franchise. There are 17 succeeding. Francais, whatever.
It's French.
Oh my God, correct me again.
No, I mean, I'm sorry. But it's French. They've got so many extra consonants and letters that don't get pronounced. It's French. Don't worry, baby. But I will do my best to keep things on the level.
Okay. Succeeding Jean Delay. His official reception under the cupola took place on the 22nd of June, 1989. The response to his speech of reception being given by Bertrand Poirot de Play. Oh my gosh, you say this.
Bertrand Poirot de Play.
After his death, he was replaced by Eric Orsena on 28th of May, 1998. On the 2nd of December, 1990, his wife Simone Cousteau died of cancer.
Very sad.
Yeah. In June 1991 in Paris, Jaques Yves Cousteau remarried to Francine Triplet, with whom he had 2 children, Diane and Pierre Yves. Francine Cousteau currently continues her husband's work as the head of the Cousteau Foundation and Cousteau Society. Wow.
Yeah, so he made the honest woman out of her. He did actually end up marrying her as soon as...
Womanizer.
I wouldn't say that. I think that he's just French.
Okay, if you say so. In November 1991, Cousteau gave an interview to the UNESCO Courier, in which he stated that he was in favor of human population control and population decrease. Cousteau says, What should we do to eliminate suffering and disease? It's a wonderful idea, but perhaps not altogether a beneficial one in the long run. If we try to implement, if we may jeopardize the future of our species, it's terrible to have to say this. World population must be stabilized, and to do that, we must eliminate 350,000 people per day.
Oh, which sounds horrible, but and maybe
I was just about to say that.
Well, maybe reminiscent of eugenics, but he honestly didn't care who died. People just had to die.
This is so horrible to contemplate that we shouldn't even say it, but the general situation in which we are involved is lamentable. In 1992, he was invited to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, for the United Nations International Conference on Environment and Development, and then he became a regular consulate for the UN and the World Bank. Jaques Yves Cousteau died of a heart attack on 25th of June 1997 in Paris, 2 weeks after his 87th birthday. He was buried in the family vault at his birthplace. An homage was paid to him by the town by naming the street which runs out to the house of his birth, Rue du Commandant.
Rue du Commandant.
Cousteau, where a commemorative plaque was placed.
In his later life, Cousteau set aside aspirations of exploring oceans and set about preserving them. He was well aware of his celebrity, but was baffled about how to use it to further his cause of conservation. Antarctica became a focus. Before his son's death, the two flew over the Antarctic landscape and were enamored with its beauty and, more importantly, its purity. As oil companies petitioned world governments to be able to explore and exploit the virgin terrain, Cousteau went to work in Washington, D.C., rubbing elbows with the likes of the future vice president and fellow eco-warrior Al Gore. The two became fast friends, and with the help of Greenpeace and James Barnes, they were able to place a moratorium on all development on the Antarctic continent, aside from those purely scientific. For half century, for a half a century. As of today, less than 30 years remain on the moratorium. Cousteau considered this a personal victory, a step in the right direction. To Cousteau, future generations had the right to experience the ocean as he had for so much of his life. The ocean inspires curiosity. Its waters are the lifeblood of the planet. Without the ocean's vibrant ecosystem, the planet would be doomed. Jaques Cousteau had a spirit that comes along rarely and leaves a mark on the world that is undeniable. He was a genius who actualized his dreams to explore and protect the silent world. His innovations have had a lasting effect on history, science, ecology, and philosophy. Almost everyone has seen or heard some form of a French accent narrating an exploration of the undersea world. He captured the imagination of millions. Even after his death in 1997, his reach has far extended his grasp. Cousteau and his numerous contemporaries continue to advocate for a cleaner, more conserved ocean, and try as they might, it still seems to be an uphill battle. The coronavirus is a plague on the planet, but it may be the planet's way of exacting Cousteau's doomsday ultimatum. Maybe the solution is a culling of the herd. It makes me as uneasy to say it as it was to Cousteau in the 90s. But it seems as though we are expanding our population faster than the earth can keep up with. Doom and gloom set aside, we still have a little bit of hope. Because of Cousteau's research and the continuing research of the Cousteau Society, we have the blueprints to save the ocean, to explore the cosmos, to ensure the survival of mankind. His multifaceted approaches to the advancement of science and engineering is invaluable to us and the rest of the creatures that inhabit this island Earth. As with most of our subjects here on Two Nuts in the Sack, we've only begun to scratch the surface of the extraordinary subject. We urge you to take a deeper look into anything we've covered in this episode. Were it not for Cousteau's curiosity, where would oceanic research be? We're trying our best. We turn to you to do better. Let's be honest. We'll always be curious, and we implore you to be the same.
All right. Please be sure to follow us on Facebook and our YouTube channel, Two Nuts in the Sack, no spaces. Please like us and subscribe. And tell us what you think. Give us some feedback. What do you want to hear?
Because, again, we don't do this for us. We do this for you as well.